For more, I'm joined now in the studio by France 24's international affairs commentator, Kethevane Gorjestani. Hi, Kethevane.
Hello.
Now, this piece starts with the arrival of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House just a couple of weeks before the start of the war. According to this article, what role did Israel play in Trump's decision?
Well, what the New York Times report shows is that Benjamin Netanyahu, when he came to the White House on February 11th, came to the Situation Room. He gave a sort of highly classified sales pitch to Donald Trump as to why they should be going to war together against Iran. And what he laid out was a plan that he saw as a near certain victory. The argument of the Israeli Prime Minister was that the ballistic program of the Iranians would be destroyed in a few weeks. The Strait of Hormuz would remain open. There would be minimal retaliation by the Iranians, and there would likely be a popular uprising and followed by a regime change, and that would be easily achieved. A day later, U.S. intelligence officials and military officials got together, made an assessment of this Israeli plan, and presented to Donald Trump. The CIA director presented it this way to Donald Trump. He said the regime change scenario was, quote, farcical. That is the word that CIA Director John Ratcliffe used. And then followed by that, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who said, in other words, it is BS. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the General Dan Kane, said this about the whole Israeli argument. He said, this, in my experience, is standard operating procedure from the Israelis. They oversell, and their plans are not always well developed. They know they need us, and that is why they are hard selling. The U.S. military and the U.S. intelligence community also pushed back on Israel's claims that this would be an easy, a painless, a quick venture in Iran. For them, yes, Iran would likely close the Strait of Hormuz. Yes, Iran would retaliate on U.S. interests in the region, and a major military campaign against Iran would also drastically deplete U.S. weapons stockpiles. But Donald Trump, according to the New York Times, was so emboldened by the success, for example, of the operation in Venezuela, that he was inclined to side with the Israelis.
And Kethevane, the report also pushes back rather forcefully on the idea that Trump's inner circle was very much united as to going to war with Iran.
Absolutely. What comes out of this report is that there was one person really who was optimistic and enthusiastic about the war. That was Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense. But most of the other officials were opposed for different reasons, but they were opposed, and they made that clear to the U.S. president. The first one, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, he was one who thought that it would be better to continue with maximum pressure, limited strikes possibly, but not a full-scale war. He said this when it was his turn to speak, says the New York Times, if the goal is regime change, we shouldn't do it. If the goal is to destroy Iran's missile program, that is a goal that we can achieve. Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, she was also worried about a possible war with Iran, but she was worried about the upcoming midterm elections in the United States. Even the communications director, Steve Chung, he expressed the PR dangers for Donald Trump of getting into war with Iran after campaigning on no new wars in the Middle East, and on the fact that over the past 8-9 months, they've been saying that they obliterated Iran's nuclear program. But according to the New York Times, no one was more opposed to this war than the Vice President, J.D. Vance, who has built a career on his opposition to the U.S., going out and starting wars against other countries. For him, the war was a disaster. It would cause regional chaos, and it would break apart Donald Trump's political coalition by betraying those voters who believed that Donald Trump would not get them in a new war. However, the various reasons for opposing this war, what was common to all of these officials is that once they made it clear what their positions were, they eventually fell in line with Donald Trump when he decided to go ahead and go into war with Iran. And I will end with this from J.D. Vance that sums up the position of the cabinet, really. You know, I think this is a bad idea, but if you want to do it, I will support you.
Kethevane, Gorjestani, thank you very much for that.